One cafe, one dream, two hearts separated by time. But what if time isn't the end of the story? In a quiet neighborhood, tucked beneath tall sycamore trees, where the houses stood a little crooked with age, and the streets whispered stories only children could hear, two best friends built a dream together. Jake Emerson was 9, all gangly limbs and scraped knees, with a heart full of big ideas and a pencil always behind his ear. Lena Morris was 10, one summer older, and endlessly patient with Jake's wild imagination. She had a notebook filled with stories, drawings of tree houses that floated above clouds, and a list of things she wanted to do before turning 11. Their favorite spot was the old maple in Jake's backyard. Its limbs stretched like welcoming arms, strong enough to hold their wooden fortress, a tree house built from leftover planks, mismatched nails, and love. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Inside the tree house, there was a crooked little shelf that held chipped mugs and crayon drawings of pastries, a tiny window that faced the sunset, and an old blanket where they'd sit cross-legged for hours, planning the future. One day, Jake said, chewing on the end of his pencil, "We'll have a cafe with twinkle lights everywhere and books on every table." Lena looked up from her sketchbook, her long lashes brushing her cheeks. "And soft music, not the annoying kind my brother listens to, but the cozy kind, like in movies." He nodded. "We'll serve cinnamon toast and lemonade in mason jars, and mint tea with honey, and those little chocolate cookies your grandma makes." Jake grinned. "It'll be the kind of place people come to when they're sad, or when they want to fall in love." Lena added something to her drawing, a tiny sign that read L and J's Café. She held it up and showed him. "That's us," she said softly. "Even if we grow up and forget everything else, we'll remember this, right?" He looked at her, his heart suddenly full in a way he didn't understand yet. "I won't forget, ever." The summer days stretched long and golden, filled with the smell of sun-warmed wood, the creak of the treehouse floor, and the rustle of pages as Lena read stories aloud. Sometimes they pretended the cafe was real. Jake would scribble out a menu on scraps of cardboard, and Lena would play waitress, taking orders in a British accent that made him laugh until his sides hurt. There was magic in the air then, a kind of soft, golden magic that only exists in childhood, when nothing has been broken yet, when promises feel like spells. One afternoon, the sky turned gray too quickly, and thunder rumbled over the hills. Jake was helping his mom bring in laundry when he saw the moving van. Lena stood in the driveway next door, her arms wrapped around a box. Eyes wide, he ran. "What's happening?" She looked up at him, rain beginning to dot her cheeks. "My dad got the job in Portland," she said quietly. "We leave tonight." "I didn't know it'd be so soon." Jake's mouth opened, then closed. His chest felt too tight. "But the cafe, our plans." Lena smiled, the kind of smile that tried not to cry. "I packed the drawing," she said. "I'm taking it with me, and I wrote it down. Our promise. If we ever lose each other, we meet at our cafe, okay?" He nodded, unable to speak. She leaned in and hugged him, small and fast, and when she stepped back, she pressed something into his hand, a folded note and a cinnamon stick. "For the tea," she whispered. Then she turned, got in the car, and was gone. The rain came heavier after that. Jake climbed up into their treehouse one last time that night, the floorboards creaking under his soaked sneakers. He sat down on the old blanket, unfolded the note. It said only, "Don't forget our dream." "I won't. L." He placed the cinnamon stick on the shelf, next to the chipped mug, and sat there until the rain stopped. Outside, the world moved on. But inside the little wooden room in the tree, time stood still. Years would pass, but some dreams, even quiet ones, whispered beneath branches and thunder clouds, refused to be forgotten. Years had drifted by, like leaves floating downstream, slow and quiet, yet somehow swift when you looked back. Jake Emerson was 27 now, a little taller, a little quieter, with laugh lines that hadn't laughed in a while. His hands bore the marks of work and weather, but his eyes still carried that distant light, the kind that dreamed in secret. He had moved back to the neighborhood the year before, after too many years away, too many cities that never felt quite like home. The noise of the world, the speed of it, the way people forgot to look up at the stars. It had worn him down, gently, almost without him noticing. There was a kind of silence in coming home, not the empty kind, but the quiet that wraps around your shoulders, like an old quilt, familiar, frayed, but warm. The old maple tree was still there, though more weathered now, its branches reaching in slightly different directions. The treehouse was long gone, taken down by time and storms, but Jake could still feel it when he looked up, like a ghost of wood and wishes. He stood under it that first night back, breath visible in the cool air, heart unsure of what it was hoping to find. He had traced his fingers over the bark, almost expecting to feel their initials, L and J, carved somewhere beneath time's thumbprint. One crisp November morning, with a chill in the air and mist hugging the sidewalks, Jake walked down Main Street, past the hardware store, past the bakery that still smelled like honey and clove, past the faded mural with children playing in the sun, and stopped in front of a small, empty storefront. The windows were dusty, the sign above it long faded, but he saw it. He saw it the way they used to. A cafe with twinkle lights everywhere, books on every table, and cinnamon in the air. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, heart strangely full, the kind of full that made your throat ache a little. And without quite knowing how it happened, he bought the place. He had no grand plan, no investors, no certainty, only a savings account he'd been too afraid to touch, and a memory he hadn't been brave enough to let go of. It took months of scrubbing and sanding, of early mornings and aching wrists, paint on his jeans, coffee stains on his notebooks, quiet humming late into the night as he tried to remember where the bookshelves were supposed to go. He kept the name simple, L and J's Café, painting it by hand on a wooden sign with a brush that shook slightly when he remembered her handwriting. Every detail, every color, every smell was a memory. The walls were a soft sage green, like the leaves outside their treehouse window. The lighting was warm and low, not dim, but soft, like candlelight had met a gentle sunrise. Twinkle lights were strung across the beams, delicate and golden, as if they had caught stars and taught them how to rest. Books lined every wall, some new, some secondhand, most with little notes tucked inside. Read on a rainy day, or it made me cry, but in a good way. He added a corner shelf just for children's books, ones they had read together long ago. And he even found a copy of The Wind in the Willows, the one with the worn cover, and a drawing of a teacup mouse she once loved. In one corner, a cinnamon stick sat in a small glass jar on a high shelf, next to a chipped mug with faded blue flowers. No one asked what it meant. Jake opened the doors just before winter, on a Monday morning, when snowflakes began to fall like slow confetti. The town was still sleepy, the streets quiet, but one by one, people wandered in, drawn by the golden light, the scent of cinnamon and coffee, the way the cafe seemed to hum like a forgotten lullaby. He remembered their faces, Mrs. Bell from the library, the young couple who'd just moved in with their toddler, Mr. Ackerman, who used to run the post office and always wore a navy scarf. They smiled, they stayed, they read and sipped and softly talked. Jake never told anyone the story. Not fully, not yet. But he hung a picture on the wall near the back, a pencil drawing of a treehouse in summer, and beside it, a handwritten list titled Things to Do Before 11. There was no explanation, just those small pieces, quiet and waiting. Each evening, when the last customer left, Jake would wipe down the counters slowly, switch off the main lights, and leave the twinkle lights glowing, just enough. Then he'd sit by the window, a steaming mug in his hands, guitar nearby, and breathe in the silence. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, steady, like time had stopped for a while. Inside, the cafe pulsed with memory and warmth, with quiet dreams and a space for something still unfolding. He didn't know if she'd ever walk through that door again, but the door was open now. The lights were on, and the air still carried cinnamon and the promise of something that had never fully gone away. Not really, just resting, waiting to be remembered. The first snowfall came early that year, dusting the sleepy streets of Rosewood in a quiet hush, like the town had drawn in a long breath and was holding it. Jake unlocked the front door of the cafe, the bell above jingling softly, echoing through the dim, cinnamon-scented stillness. It was barely 7 a.m., and the sky still wore its winter blue veil, pale and slow to wake. Outside, the streetlights glowed faintly beneath layers of snow. The world felt wrapped in wool, muffled and gentle. He shrugged off his coat, fingers stiff from the cold, and crossed the wooden floor toward the kitchen. His boots left damp impressions in the shape of half moons behind him. Fading fast, the cafe had become his ritual, his heartbeat, the dream he had built board by board, in honor of a promise whispered in a treehouse long ago. Twinkle lights draped the windows year-round, warm and quiet, casting a golden glow over the reclaimed wood tables and mismatched chairs. A soft jazz playlist hummed from the vintage speakers in the corners, and the scent of vanilla and cloves clung to the air like memory. Jake moved with practiced ease, flipping switches, lighting candles in little glass jars, grinding fresh beans. He always brewed a second cup and placed it at the same corner table near the window, across from his own, every morning, just in case. The air was still when he sat down, cradling his mug in both hands, staring out at the street. Snow fell lazily now, drifting like ash, slow and sleepy. A softness clung to the scene, like it belonged in a storybook. He didn't expect anything different from this morning until he heard the faintest crunch of footsteps. He blinked, leaned closer to the window. There, through the foggy glass, a figure moved slowly down the sidewalk, bundled in a navy coat, scarf wrapped around their face, boots kicking up small clouds of powder. They paused outside the cafe. Jake's breath caught. The figure tilted their head, squinting at the sign. L and J's Café carved into the frosted wood. Then, slowly, they stepped forward. The bell jingled softly. Cold air curled in behind her as she stepped inside, eyes adjusting, cheeks flushed pink from the wind. She pulled down her scarf, and Jake forgot how to breathe. Lena, older now, of course, but not by much. The same eyes, soft and searching, the same way her shoulders curved slightly inward, like she carried stories too delicate to share with just anyone. She stood there for a long moment, taking it all in, the twinkle lights, the menu board scrawled in chalk, the bookshelf near the counter, the mug on the table by the window. Her gaze landed on him, and a smile bloomed, slow, stunned, almost unreal. "Jake?" she asked, her voice small, like she didn't trust it yet. He stood up, his chair sliding gently against the floor. The world tilted a little. "Hey," he breathed. Lena stepped forward, her eyes glassy, fingers pulling off her gloves one by one. "I almost didn't come inside," she said. "I thought maybe it wasn't real." Jake's lips twitched into a smile, heart hammering beneath his flannel. "It's real," he said softly. "It's always been real." She looked around again, her hands brushing the back of a nearby chair. "You remembered everything." "I promised I would." Her fingers grazed the edge of the table where the second cup sat, still steaming, waiting. "For me?" she whispered. He nodded. "Every morning." Lena sat down slowly, eyes never leaving his. "I came back because of the dream," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I found the drawing in a box with old school stuff, and suddenly I needed to know if it was more than just pretend." Jake sat across from her, elbows resting on the table, shoulders softening. "It was never pretend," he murmured. Outside, snow danced across the sidewalk, swirling gently against the windows. Inside, time bent quietly around them, like it used to, back in the treehouse, when all they needed was a pencil, a notebook, and each other. And as the morning light seeped into the cafe, golden and slow, something unspoken bloomed in the air between them. A new chapter, built on the roots of an old, sacred promise. The cafe lights blinked gently in the early evening hush, like the stars themselves were waiting, just outside the windows. Jake stood alone behind the counter again, wiping down a clean mug, not because it needed it, but because his hands didn't know what else to do. Lena had been in yesterday, and everything felt different now. Even the air. The cafe still smelled like cinnamon and honey. The record player still whispered old jazz tunes in the corner. But Jake's heartbeat had changed rhythm. He kept glancing toward the door, not expecting her, and yet hoping. Upstairs, in the small apartment above the cafe, his desk sat in quiet disarray. A half-finished song lay scribbled across torn notebook paper. Words crossed out, rewritten, paused, then abandoned. When you left, I saved a chair. That line stayed. He couldn't let it go. Jake wandered up after closing, shoulders heavy, fingers brushing along the wooden rail as he climbed. The living space was simple, warm, a faded couch, books stacked in lopsided towers, a guitar in the corner missing one string. On the small kitchen table, 2 letters sat side by side. One was still sealed, its envelope yellowed by time. The other was open, unfolded like a memory. Jake sat down slowly, picking up the first letter, the one he had never sent. He remembered writing it years ago, after college, late at night, with rain hitting the window, just like it had that last night in the treehouse. Lena, I don't know if you even remember, but I still have the cinnamon stick and the note. If you're ever in town, our cafe is waiting. Even if you don't come, I'll still be there. He'd never mailed it. His fingers moved to the second letter, the one Lena had brought with her yesterday, but hadn't spoken about. It was in her handwriting, slightly slanted, with small doodles of coffee cups and stars in the margin. Jake, I walked past the cafe 3 times before I found the courage to go inside. I thought maybe you'd forgotten, maybe you'd moved on, but you didn't, and neither did I. I kept the drawing all these years, and the list. Things to do before 11. Number 7 was open our cafe. I think we're still on time. Jake let the paper fall softly back to the table. Outside, snow drifted down like feathers, thick and slow, and the world softened beneath its weight. He stood, crossed the room, and opened the small window facing the street. Below, the cafe sign glowed quietly in the dusk. L and J's, a promise whispered in tree branches, now carved in wood and hanging under stars. He sat by the window with his guitar, gently strumming the broken string anyway, letting it hum in its own imperfect way. And then the melody came back, simple, slow, just a handful of notes, but it was enough. He sang softly, "You left with rain, but I waited with light, saved your seat every morning, hoped you'd walk in one night." Downstairs, the cafe lights flickered again, but he didn't notice. He was somewhere else now, back in a treehouse under golden summer skies, where dreams, however quiet, however forgotten, had never really faded. They had just been waiting, like letters never sent, like songs not quite finished, like hearts still learning the language of return. The wind pressed gently against the window pane, whispering like an old friend, its hush carrying stories from faraway places and the quiet memories of yesterday. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into the guitar, his fingers loose over the strings, feeling each vibration in his chest. He remembered the warmth of Lena's presence just the day before, the way her eyes held both apology and hope, the way her laughter, quieter than before, still sounded like home. On the table, a small notebook lay half open. He picked it up, flipping through the pages until he reached a sketch she'd made years ago. A tiny cafe nestled in trees, with a sign that still read L and J's Café. Steam curling out of tiny cups, stars sprinkled above. He traced it with his finger, then grabbed a pen. Below the sketch, he added a new line, still waiting, but no longer alone. Outside, the snowfall continued, slow, patient, wrapping the world in white softness. In the silence, time didn't hurry. It sat beside him in the shape of old dreams, warm tea, unfinished songs, and a love that never asked to be grand, only real. Jake whispered to the air, to the snow, to the night, I think she's coming back, for good this time. And somewhere deep inside the cafe, a single light flickered, then glowed steady, as if the dream itself had heard him and answered. The next morning came slowly, as if the sun itself didn't want to rush things. Light crept gently through the cafe's lace curtains, painting golden shapes across the floor, like the shadows were stretching just to hold the quiet. Jake stood behind the counter, but this time he wasn't alone. Lena sat in the corner booth by the window, a cup of chamomile tea between her hands, steam curling up in soft spirals, catching the sunlight like something magical. She hadn't said much yet, just smiled, that same gentle smile that had haunted his memories. Jake didn't speak either, not right away. He watched the way her fingers traced the edge of the mug, slow, thoughtful, the way her eyes followed the falling snow outside, as if each flake held some secret from their past. And maybe it did. The cafe was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, just full of stories not yet told. He brought her a plate with a single blueberry scone, warm, buttery, like the ones they used to imagine baking when they were kids. She looked up at him, her eyes soft with something unspoken. You remembered, she whispered. He nodded, not trusting his voice just yet. Outside, the world moved slowly, people walking past in scarves and heavy coats, not knowing that something old and precious had just stepped quietly back into place, back into rhythm, back into memory. Lena reached into her bag, pulling out a small envelope, pale blue, worn at the corners. Jake tilted his head, curious. I found this in an old book last week, she said. It's a list we made, senior year, before graduation. She opened it slowly, unfolding it like a map of another time. Across the top, in her handwriting, were the words, things to do before life gets loud. Jake let out a small laugh, surprised by the sudden ache in his chest. There were 11 items, numbered, messy, full of hope. 1. Dance in the rain without shoes. 2. Write a song. We actually finished 3. Try to make the perfect latte foam heart. 4. Build a blanket for it and sleep in it. 5. Watch the stars from the treehouse. 6. Paint something terrible and hang it anyway. 7. Open a cafe. 8. Forgive someone. 9. Surprise each other. 10. Learn to say what we mean. 11. Come back. They both stared at the last one. Lena's fingers hovered above it, not quite touching. I didn't think I ever would, she said softly, but something kept pulling me here. Jake looked at her, really looked, not just the Lena he remembered, but the Lena now, older, steadier, still her. You're here now, he said, voice barely more than a breath. She nodded, eyes shimmering with a tenderness she couldn't quite name. The bell above the door jingled gently as a customer stepped in, an older man with a newspaper and a kind smile. But Jake barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the corner booth, to the list between them, to the warmth of shared quiet. Later that day, they sat on the floor of the apartment above the cafe, surrounded by dusty boxes and forgotten things. They found old photos, scraps of songs, a chipped mug with a heart drawn in Sharpie. They laughed more than they cried, though sometimes the laughter trembled. Outside, the snow turned to rain, soft, steady. Jake walked her back to her car as evening fell, both of them wrapped in silence that didn't need filling. Before she opened the door, she paused. "Do you think we'll finish the list?" she asked, not quite looking at him. Jake smiled, slow, certain. "We already are." And with that, she left. But the space she'd stepped into, the memories they dusted off, and the list now hanging on the cafe wall, all remained. A place that remembers. A heart that never stopped waiting. And a dream that had never truly ended, only paused. The sun rose slowly that morning, as if it too was reluctant to wake. Soft streaks of amber light stretched across the windows of the cafe, slipping through the lace curtains like memories through fingers. Delicate, warm, barely there. Jake stood behind the counter again, his hands wrapped around a warm mug, not drinking, just holding, feeling the heat bloom through his palms. Everything was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows after something is said, but not yet finished. Then, the bell above the door chimed, a soft, almost hesitant sound, and there she was, Lena, standing in the golden light, her cheeks kissed pink by the cold, hair tucked beneath a knitted hat the color of oatmeal and early mornings. She carried a book and something unreadable behind her smile. Jake's breath caught, not dramatically, not even fully, just enough. He nodded toward her favorite booth, the one by the window, the one that always seemed to save the best light. She walked over slowly, running her fingers gently along the edge of each table as she passed, like she was greeting an old friend. Jake made her tea without asking, chamomile with honey, a slice of lemon set carefully on the rim, and brought it to her with a shy steadiness. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she echoed, her voice a little tired, a little tender, but entirely here. She opened the book, placing it gently between them. It was their old idea notebook, the one they used to pass back and forth during senior year. Each page filled with impossible plans, crooked doodles, and dreams too big for such young hands. One page had a sketch of the cafe, drawn in pencil, smeared at the corners, with little hearts floating above it. "I found it last night," she said, tracing the edges. "I thought I'd lost it years ago." Jake smiled, not with his lips, but with something quieter, deeper. They sat like that for a while. No rush, no need to speak, just the hum of the old record player in the corner, the scent of fresh bread rising from the oven in the back. Eventually, Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a tiny jar, sealed tight, a soft amber glow catching in the morning light. Jake tilted his head, curious. "It's honey," she said, "from the farmer's market near my old place. It tastes like springtime, even in January. I thought maybe it could live here now, on the shelf with the others." Jake took it from her gently, placing it on the open shelf near the register, right beside the cinnamon sticks and the little clay pot someone once brought from Santa Fe. "It's perfect," he said. The clock ticked softly in the background, but time didn't seem to pass. Outside, people walked their dogs, sipped coffee from paper cups, bundled up against the winter wind. But inside, it was always summer in the treehouse, always laughter in jars, and paper dreams. Jake turned to her after a while. Are you staying? He asked. Lena looked down at her tea, then back up at him, eyes bright but cautious. I think I want to, she said slowly, but I don't know what staying looks like yet. Jake nodded. You don't have to know right now, he said. You just have to sit in the booth and let me bring you tea. And maybe help me finish that song. Her laugh was small, like a candle being lit. They moved upstairs that afternoon, the light following them like a quiet witness. She helped him sort through the old records, rearrange the books by color and size, opened the window just a little to let the cool breeze in. She found the song again, the one he'd started, the one that stopped at I saved a chair, and nothing more. Lena picked up a pen. She didn't ask. She just added the next line. You came back in light, with a book and a smile. Jake stared at the words, then at her, and in that moment, something shifted. Not a loud shift, not a storm or a crash, but the way a lock clicks when the right key is turned. Later that evening, the cafe filled with its usual warmth. A couple by the fireplace, reading quietly. An old man humming to himself over soup. The little bell above the door, singing its soft notes every so often. Jake glanced toward the booth. Lena was there, still there. The booth, the tea, the light, and something new. Something beginning, something staying. The snow had stopped sometime in the night, leaving behind a silvery hush, the kind that settled gently on windowsills and made every sound feel softer. Inside the cafe, the morning light was slow to stretch, golden and kind, pouring through the windows like honey. Jake stood near the back hallway, a mug in hand, eyes resting on a door he hadn't opened in years. It was painted blue, a little faded now, chipped around the edges, but still holding the color of deep skies after rain. Behind it was the room they used to talk about. The music room, Lena had called it once, grinning over a sketchbook at 17. We'll put in a little stage and fairy lights, and people can just dream there, you know? He hadn't touched it since he bought the place, never had the heart, but now Lena stood beside him, wrapped in her thick cardigan, the one with tiny suns stitched along the hem. Her fingers brushed the edge of the mug in his hands, quiet, steady. Can we look inside? She asked. Jake nodded, slowly, then turned the old brass knob. The door creaked open, like an old friend clearing its throat, and the room greeted them with a rush of cold air, dust, and memories. It was empty, mostly a wooden floor, scuffed from years past, light filtering through a high window, casting long, delicate shadows across the floorboards. In the corner, a small stage had already been framed out. Someone, maybe the previous owner, or maybe Jake himself years ago, had started something here. Lena stepped inside first, her boots echoing gently, and turned in a slow circle. It still smells like chalk and old stories, she said, smiling. Jake chuckled softly, and maybe a little like forgotten dreams. She walked over to the wall where someone had once pinned photographs, the faint outlines still visible where the sun hadn't touched. He watched her fingers trail across the wall, the way she moved so lightly, like she didn't want to wake the room too fast. Jake joined her, kneeling to wipe dust from the corner, uncovering a small wooden crate. Inside, an old notebook, a set list, and a tangled string of fairy lights. Lena knelt beside him, pulling the lights gently from the crate, holding them up, watching how they caught the light. "These still work. I bet they do," she whispered. They spent the morning like that, quietly bringing life back into the space. They dusted shelves, unfolded old curtains, hung the lights along the back wall. Jake repaired a loose floorboard while Lena swept in slow, rhythmic movements, her humming soft and content. At one point, she found a jar of dried lavender, long forgotten in the back cabinet, and set it near the window, letting the scent drift into the cold air. By afternoon, the room felt different, not finished, not perfect, but awake. Jake brought in a record player, set it gently on the windowsill, and played one of their favorite albums from college, the notes drifting like feathers through the newly breathed in air. Lena sat cross-legged on the small stage, watching the dust swirl in the golden light, a smile tucked in the corners of her lips. "I used to imagine this," she said softly. "Me here, you in the kitchen, music playing, people laughing, like it was all stitched into the day." Jake leaned against the doorframe, sipping his now cold coffee. "And now it's real," he said. Lena nodded. "It feels like something's healing here, not just the walls." They didn't speak for a while. After that, words weren't needed. The music filled the gaps, and the warmth of shared presence did the rest. That evening, after the cafe closed, they brought dinner upstairs, sat by the window with bowls of soup and mismatched spoons, watching as the first stars blinked into the velvet sky. Jake pulled out his guitar, this time with 6 strings, freshly restrung that afternoon. He played quietly, a melody that had no name, but felt familiar. Lena leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, and Jake, for the first time in years, didn't feel like he was waiting anymore. He felt like he was home, in the room with the blue door, where forgotten dreams had stretched, yawned, and slowly opened their eyes again. The wind had shifted again by morning, warmer now, as if the sky itself had decided to breathe a little softer. The cafe opened slowly that day, not with the chime of a crowd, but with a gentle hush, the kind that let the morning light wander through the windows undisturbed. Jake stood by the counter, tying his apron slower than usual, his fingers lingering over each knot, not because he was tired, but because today felt different. Outside, the world moved in that quiet way it did between seasons, where the snow hadn't completely melted, but hope clung to the edges of sidewalks in the form of tiny green shoots. Inside, Lena was already sitting in the corner booth, the one with the yellow cushion they'd never replaced. She had a small notebook open, a mug cupped between both hands, steam curling toward her cheeks. Jake caught the look in her eyes before she saw him. It was distant, thoughtful, and full of something like waiting. "Morning," he said, his voice low, a smile tugging at one side of his face. She looked up, her smile unfolding slowly. "Hey." There was something delicate about the way the sunlight hit her hair, the way it framed her face like something out of a dream. Jake moved behind the counter, pouring himself a cup of coffee, the old machine letting out a familiar sigh. He brought it over to her, sat down across the table, and for a few moments, neither of them spoke. Only the clock on the wall ticked, and the record player, spinning a quiet Billie Holiday track, filled the space between their heartbeats. I used to leave notes in the windowsill, Lena said after a while, her voice like a thread of silk. When you were away, college, road trips, remember? Jake nodded slowly. I found one last year, folded behind the curtain. It said, I'm still dreaming, just slower now. Lena smiled, her eyes misting. I think I wrote that the day after your dad called me, told me you'd be staying longer in New York. Jake leaned back, his fingers tapping the side of his cup. I read it during a thunderstorm, made me want to come home, even though I didn't yet. The booth creaked softly beneath them as they sat in the lull of their shared memory. Then Lena reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small, folded square of paper, and placed it on the table between them. I found this tucked in my old journal last night. I think it was yours. Jake looked at it for a long moment before unfolding it. His own handwriting stared back at him, younger, uneven, the ink slightly faded. One day, we'll build something soft together, something that doesn't need to shout to be heard. He blinked slowly, the weight of it catching in his chest. I must have written this after one of our arguments, he said, back when I thought love had to be loud, dramatic, like the movies. Lena reached forward, gently brushing her fingers over the corner of the paper. Turns out, soft was stronger all along. The door chime rang then. A quiet pair of footsteps entered. An older woman with a green scarf and a book under her arm, followed by a young man in a beanie, laughing at something on his phone. Jake stood to take their orders, but his eyes lingered on Lena for a beat longer, holding her gaze, grounding himself in the warmth of the moment. Later, when the lunch hour passed and the cafe emptied again, Jake climbed the stairs to the apartment with a new sense of calm. On the windowsill, above his writing desk, he placed the note Lena had given him, pressed a small stone on top to keep it in place, and beside it, he placed a new one, blank for now, but waiting, because some stories, even the quiet ones, needed space to grow, to pause, to breathe, just like them. And in that soft pause, in that in-between hour, where day began to lean into night, and lights began to glow again in sleepy windows across the town, the cafe and the two hearts inside it felt like the safest place in the world. The morning crept in slowly, like honey spilling over the edge of a spoon, golden, patient, wrapping the cafe in a soft hush. Jake was already downstairs, the bell above the front door still asleep, the chairs still turned up on the tables, but the record player spun. Soft jazz hummed through the quiet, the same melody that had played the very first day they'd opened. It skipped slightly, right in the middle of a trumpet solo, like the music itself remembered too. Jake didn't fix it. He let it play, let the imperfection bloom in the silence, like a tiny wink from the past. The door creaked softly, not the front one, the side door, the one Lena always used when she wanted to sneak in without making a scene. Jake looked up, and there she was, wrapped in her oversized cardigan, hair still a little messy from sleep, cheeks pink from the morning chill. She held two paper bags, one with cinnamon rolls, the other with oranges. I figured, she said, if we're going to have a morning, it should smell like something sweet. Jake grinned, stepping out from behind the counter. And citrus, because you're always trying to balance things. Lena's eyes twinkled, guilty. They moved like a dance after that, without needing to speak. She brewed the coffee. He unwrapped the pastries. They set 2 mugs down on the window table, the one with the view of the oak tree. The sun filtered through the glass in ribbons, lighting up the little flecks of dust that floated lazily in the air, like sleepy fireflies. Jake leaned back in his chair, watching the way Lena tore the orange, one slice at a time, like each piece had a secret. He wanted to say something, but the words didn't line up the way he wanted. So instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out something small, a record adapter, round, yellow, worn. Lena stared at it, blinking slowly. Is that from the garage? Jake nodded. The one we used in the treehouse, back when we thought every love story had a soundtrack. She took it carefully, holding it between her fingers, like it was made of something precious. I didn't know you still had this, she whispered. I didn't either, he said. Not until last night. It was at the bottom of the old coat I used to wear. Silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of their memories, tangled and soft, with edges worn smooth by time. Lena looked down at the record player, which had just begun another slow spin, and then it skipped. Same note, same second. Again, Jake stood, walked over, and lifted the needle gently, placing it back. But this time, instead of playing through, he paused it, turned to Lena. Do you want to put something else on? He asked. She tilted her head, thinking, then nodded slowly. Something new. Together, they sifted through the vinyl collection tucked beneath the counter, fingers brushing album covers, laughing at old favorites, remembering forgotten tracks, until they found it, a soft folk album, faded cover, handwritten track list. Jake placed it on the player, let the first notes drift out, warm guitar, low harmonies, the kind of music that made you close your eyes without realizing. They sat back down, hands curled around their mugs, steam rising, blending with sunlight. And then Lena said, almost too quietly, I was scared you'd moved on, that this place was just a museum for a version of us that didn't fit anymore. Jake's voice was barely louder than the music. I thought maybe I had to, for a while, until you walked through that door again, and everything made sense, all over again. Outside, the world was slowly waking up. A dog barked 2 streets over. A car door slammed. A breeze rustled the trees. But inside, time didn't hurry. It curled up in the corners of the cafe, content to let them sit a little longer. Together, Jake reached across the table, his fingers brushing Lena's. She didn't pull away, didn't speak, just smiled. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the record, the next song began. No skipping, just music, soft, steady, like the beginning of something real. Again, the first morning of spring arrived quietly, not with fanfare, but with a kind of hush that carried possibility. The frost on the windows had melted into dew. The trees across the street stood taller, their branches tinged with the promise of green. Inside the cafe, the soft hum of life began before the door ever opened. Jake stood by the counter, sleeves rolled, eyes watching the espresso machine warm itself with slow sighs. Everything felt familiar, and yet unmistakably new. Lena padded downstairs in her socks, cardigan slipping from one shoulder, hair still tousled from sleep. She stopped at the bottom step, her eyes roaming across the space they'd built together. Paintings they'd chosen now hung by the booths. A bookshelf filled with mismatched titles nestled near the windows, and on every table, tiny glass vases held wildflowers gathered from the back alley behind the cafe. Jake turned as she stepped onto the floor and smiled. "No shoes, huh?" he asked, teasing gently. Lena smirked, stretching like a cat. "I wanted to feel the morning through the wood." He handed her a cup, steam curling upward in sleepy spirals. They didn't speak for a moment. They just listened to the record player, soft and grainy, spinning an old Ella Fitzgerald song, to the sound of the city, just beginning to wake, footsteps on sidewalks, distant horns, the world breathing again, to their hearts, now quieter but fuller. The bell above the door jingled faintly. Their first customer of the day walked in, an older woman with silver curls and a red scarf. She nodded at them both and made her way to the corner booth. Lena turned to Jake. "You ready?" He looked around at the cafe, at her, and nodded. "Yeah, more than ever." They moved like rhythm and melody now, seamless, one pouring coffee while the other folded pastries into napkins, refilling cream jars, straightening sugar packets, all without a word. The cafe began to fill slowly. A young couple with twin toddlers took the front table by the chalkboard. A college student in headphones curled into the nook beneath the window. An older man read a paper at the bar, his coffee always black. No cream, no sugar. And Lena watched them all, her hands wrapped around her cup, her heart strangely full. Jake leaned against the doorway to the kitchen, watching her watch them. She's smiling again, he thought, not the careful smile she wore those first few days back, but something softer now, something that grew in corners and held sunlight. At noon, they took a break, sat outside behind the cafe, where the air smelled like warm bread and coming rain. Lena pulled her knees up onto the bench, resting her chin on them. "You remember that treehouse?" she asked. Jake chuckled. "The one we swore we'd rebuild into a castle one day?" She nodded. "We never made it past the drawing stage." Jake leaned back, eyes on the drifting clouds. "Maybe we didn't have to. Maybe this cafe is the castle." Lena tilted her head. "It's smaller than I imagined, but warmer," he whispered. A long silence settled between them, not heavy, just full, of days that had passed, and the ones still coming. Later that evening, after the final customer left, and the door whispered shut behind them, Lena placed the closed sign in the window. Jake dimmed the lights, and for a while, they just sat together on the couch upstairs. A record still played faintly, someone strumming a guitar under stars. Jake held a notepad in his lap. On it, a new song had begun to take shape. It didn't speak of heartbreak or waiting. It spoke of return, of home, of a cafe imagined by two dreamers and finally brought to life by time and trust. Lena rested her head on his shoulder, and Jake turned slightly, pressing a kiss to her hair. Outside, the wind carried laughter from the corner bakery. The scent of night blossoms drifted through the open window, and the cafe, their cafe, glowed faintly in the twilight. The door stayed open, not just the wooden one, with its tiny golden bell, but the door between them, the one that had taken years to find again, and now would never close.